Kia ora koutou, good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the August Child Development and Disability Clinical Network Lunch and Learn. That's really nice to see you all online. This is hosted by the Paediatric Society of New Zealand, and we encourage anybody that's online to consider joining the Paediatric Society for the networks and professional opportunities that might allow you to be involved with. Today, we're really pleased to welcome Professor Anita Gibbs. Professor Anita Gibbs works at the University of Otago, where her work is in the areas of sort of social work and criminology, with a particular interest in thinking about fetal alcohol syndrome. She's developed a series of training courses for both professionals and caregivers that we're going to hear and learn about today. And yeah, Anita has some really interesting awards, and we're really grateful that she's giving us the time to share her understandings. We just remind you that we have the Lunch and Learn Network has a discussion page that we're really grateful if people spend the time to enter any reflections or thoughts or ideas so that we can use them for our next session, which is our knowledge translation session on the 13th of September, 12 o'clock, again on Zoom. And also feel welcome to give us any feedback or share any of your ideas with us with that other link that we have there. I'll pop that in the chat at the moment. But I'll now just hand over to Anita. She'll just take a moment to upload her slides and then I'll leave her to start talking when she's ready. Thank you so much, Anita.
Kia ora. There we go. I think you can now see my slides. So, kia ora koutou, haere mai ki te wanaga o Atako, ko Anita Gibbs taku ingoa, no ingarangi aho, engari kei Otapoti taku kaianga. So, Anita, originally from the UK and currently and have been in Otapoti for 23 years. Excuse my slightly nasally voice. I'm recovering from COVID like many of the population, but I'm able to share what I'm going to share with you today. And this is the topic of online training and support courses for caregivers and children and youth with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And I'm going to assume a little bit in the audience in terms of not going through any FASD basics. I'll assume you are aware of this disability, but it's a massive and growing area of interest and significance. Okay, so what I'd like to say at the beginning is, in terms of background, just briefly, is that what I found as a caregiver of young people now living with FASD, ADHD, and autism, is that there was nothing for my population, my group of people. I've spent a lot of time with caregivers, being a caregiver over the years, and essentially nothing that would suit. Many caregivers go on endless parenting courses that are completely unsuited to their needs in terms of the learning philosophies and the lack of knowledge around FASD as a disability. So this was born out of a need that I saw as a practitioner, social work qualified practitioner, as an academic researching in the field, and as a caregiver knowing exactly what is not available. A lack of specialization in terms of this particular disability fueled my desire to create something that would be bespoke and specific to the needs of parents and caregivers. So the realities for caregivers is they're their best, they're their children's greatest advocates, but they're often struggling to get the helps and supports that they need, and they're often asking for more helps and supports, and they go looking and don't find what they're looking for. So in the end, I created a 7-week course in Dunedin and hosted it with a colleague back in 2017. That was face-to-face, 7-week pilot course. It went really well. We did post follow-up interviews, got really good feedback. Then NOFASD, I presented it at a conference in 2018 in Australia, and NOFASD approached me and said, can we do more together for Australia? And I said, yeah, sure. Digital, online. Okay, so we need to use Zoom. So essentially, we did the first pilot in 2019. The references for the details of the courses are at the end on the slide, so you'll be able to check that stuff out and read the details about that. And then NOFASD were fortunate enough to get money in 2021 and 2022 to run a good chunk of groups for eight particular courses. So we've done that now, and we're riding that up too. So essentially, I created this program or course to assist caregivers who are caring for children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder to have a systemic approach to that, so that they not only develop resilience and strategies to help their individual families, but also they have a strategic aspect to it where they can work with each other to help each other to deal with systems and to deal with professionals and work well with professionals. So it takes a social model of disability approach, essentially, to say that, you know, we've got people with these challenges, lifelong disabilities, impairments. I try not to be too negative, but challenges that live in a disabling society, essentially, and we've got to work with that and get the best for our children. How do we best do that? We can help each other because we're experts of our own lived experience. So the course has been developed around a certain set of presumptions, you know, that parents are experts in their own lived experience, caregivers are. They often know what's going on for their children, and that they can work in partnership with professionals to get the best helps and supports that they need for to live well, basically, in a disabling society. I've obviously drawn on a range of evidence as I've developed this package, evidence-based practice from primarily North America, Canada in particular, but also Australia and the UK, given that I've been updating my material as I've gone along. But again, you can read about that in the articles mentioned at the end. So there's just one example of a social media post last year for the recruiting, families linking with families, as it's called in Australia. Now in New Zealand, we have a different name, so the names change slightly depending on who's getting involved. But we take a strong education. So we do, you know, an FASD 101. We make sure we cover the basics and key concepts and give people enough knowledge in the topic. But we very much emphasize peer-to-peer support and strength of the caregivers attending, and belief that, if you like, we can self-help and support each other through the 7-week basic course and beyond. So there's an emphasis on trying to pay it forward, so that people, if they want to carry on post the 7-week structure, they can take that forward. And in Australia, that's been happening, and in Dunedin, we still do that. I take a number of brain-based perspectives based on the research, which tells us about the brain impairments, the 10 brain impairments, and you know, interact that with the need to understand systemic approach to helping families and the impact of how society views this disability and is often intolerant towards its disability. Taking an ecosystems approach is pretty important, but as is a child rights stroke human rights and disability focused. So that's all. If you want to know more, as I say, read the articles, you'll get a bit more in depth to that. It's fundamental to how we set up the course, I guess. It's also fundamental that we use competent, experienced facilitators. Originally, that was professionally trained, a nurse and a social worker. Over time, well, we've had teachers, but over time, we've used experienced, particularly with NOFASD, experienced caregiver facilitators, often who've been professionally trained, but they've had 15 or 20 years often of being caregivers, running training courses, really competent facilitators. So we've trained them as we've gone along. We call them parent coaches in training. So we have a mechanism by which we train them as we go along. The basic topics, nothing too fancy. Covering, you know, what we need to cover about the disability, using mini talks, using PowerPoints that we always give out, using tip sheets. We get document guides. We email people in between each session. So if they've got specific questions, you know, they might ask us about eating habits or managing finances that we might not have talked about in any of the particular sessions. we will respond to people and look for material to give them in the subsequent week. We give people a take-home task every week, something to reflect on, something that's not too painful, something that they might enjoy doing, and they bring that back and share with us the following week. So we try to give as many resources to people as possible without overwhelming them, and the emphasis is as much interaction within the broader content each week as we go, so that people have absolute buy-in, feel that they are connected to that support group, and that their knowledge is valued and appreciated. So those are the basic topics. Here's a few examples. So the 8 magic keys, extremely well known in the field of FASD, from Canadian researchers and practitioners. We use it a lot in our practices in New Zealand. It's certainly in the FASD community we do, and that's just the emphasis on, you know, structure and support and repetition, particularly for our group of young people and children, because their developmental level, if you like, their dysmaturity aspect is always a reality on a day-to-day basis. So the need for caregivers to you know, repeat themselves over and over and over and over again, and to scaffold the care of their children in terms of learning new tasks and being able to participate in social life is really critical. So, you know, we keep it simple, keep it short and sweet. This model in New Zealand has been used as well. Something called the 5S model has been used in the courts by Judge Tony Fitzgerald, in terms of how he thinks about FASD when he's working with and sentencing young people. So it's pretty robust. It can be used anywhere and in any situation. So that's one resource. We've got basically, you know, inevitably too many resources. This is another one of my favorites. We printed out sometimes on an A3 from North America again. Lovely colleague called Dorothy Badry and one of her students. Again, in terms of caregivers, we talk about resilience, we talk about self-care, we talk about, you know, the realities and the overwhelmingness of a caregiver's job, and anywhere that a professional can stand alongside an ally with caregivers, drawing on some of this material will offer hope and could make a difference to the everyday struggles that caregivers have in relation to parenting children and youth with FASD. So we do talk about the challenges across the life course. We talk about all the different supports that people need. And of course, mostly in New Zealand, sadly, we often are talking about the lack of supports, but how do we troubleshoot to get more of what we might need as a caregiver family, and as trying to get a team of supporters around those caregivers, and then what the reality of the caregiver job is, and how do we get different people to help us along the way. So it's all good stuff. Here's another one that basically a lot of our participants give out to teachers. Again, it's widely circulated internationally in the FASD world, and a lot of parents give this particular slide to teachers to talk about what's going on for their children at school, and how the attitudes of intolerance, because people really don't understand what's going on for the brain domains in FASD, the impairments, the intolerance ends up, you know, being judgmental in terms of, oh, the child's not obeying the rules, oh, they keep making the same mistakes, oh, they're late again, oh, they're not sitting still, they're impulsive and fidgety, you know, that those whole layers of judgments that parents and children experience on a day-to-day basis, sadly, when they go to school or try to participate in different activities. We need to reframe that in terms of the brain domain impairments and impacts. So we need to rethink, all of us. I'm as ableist, I feel, as the next person, because I'm not understanding the world that my young people and children live in. So the interpretation for FASD is to actually explain, you know, that these children have a brain injury, a lifelong brain injury, where things will take longer. The sensory issues will be massive. They could get overloaded and so forth. They don't interpret the social cues properly, perhaps. They need a lot of extra help and support. That's real. It's very real. each time we've run a group, we do a course evaluation. We've done slightly different ones for some of the different mechanisms, because I've done face-to-face and digital. But essentially, I'm always surprised. I keep thinking, why are we getting such good feedback? I'm always expecting not to get good feedback. I don't know why. That's just probably because at university I don't always get good feedback from my students. But the feedback has been absolutely overwhelming and positive. So 92% of our participants report improved knowledge and skills. 91% report they have a better understanding of how to support their child as a result of their participation. Over 100% of the families linking with families groups report that they develop supportive peer relationships via their participation, and 100% report improved motivation and confidence as a result of participation. So it's really exciting to me that a grassroots program with academic validity has done so well, and qualitative feedback is also has been really good, and people keep talking about, you know, it's so good to other people who get them, be with those people, good to talk with others. It's great to have good facilitators who also get it and are not kind of patronizing or are too professional. They're not, you know, you do need a professional element. You do need people who can run groups well, but at the same time, you need people obviously who completely understand the daily nightmares sometimes, as well as the daily joys that can be the parenting experience for these children. So yeah, so many ways that we've had positive feedback. So that's kind of really exciting for me, always being somebody who kind of goes, is it going to work or is it not going to work? Now in New Zealand, because most of the bulk of this course has been run in Australia, but I've done quite a few sort of face-to-face versions in New Zealand. But thankfully, just recently, FASD-CAN Aotearoa New Zealand have essentially zhuzhed up all the content and the slides and the just the accessibility of the program. And it's now called Life with FASD, Understand and Connect with Aroha. Now, they've obtained, FASD-CAN itself has obtained a wee bit of pilot money to, get the first course was done on a marae in South Auckland over a Friday night and a Saturday. The second course is currently running during the day as a digital 7-week course. So they've had a bit of money to pilot it in Auckland, and so far so good, really positive feedback. So that's super exciting that we potentially have this available in New Zealand. If you have or know of anyone, there's an email, training@fasd. It's just on the bottom of that slide. Express your interest, or if you think there's something you would like and would like to see happening, like to come to your region, you know, in any way you think this would be helpful, email Tracy at FASD-CAN to say, hey, we're just interested. We heard Anita's talk. There's no money yet for taking it forward. We've had the money for pilot, but yeah, well, maybe there's a little bit of money, but again, it's trying to find the source of funding for these amazing programs. We've done everything on an oily rag previously because it's just so difficult to get core funding. But FASD-CAN are taking it forward, which is super exciting. FASD-CAN, for those of you who may or may not know, is the if you like, peak body of support for families and caregivers. And there's a professionals Facebook page as well in Aotearoa. So it's a fabulous resource for all of Aotearoa. They have a varied series of webinars, which you may want to follow up and look on their website. They've got a caregiver toolkit handbook, which we use in our courses, and it's free for anyone that signs up as a member if they're a caregiver, and it's only $25 if you sign up and you're professionals. It's full of resources, brilliant ideas, and you can become a member. So those two articles there listed on that final slide will give you more material. I mean, I guess if you want to, well, one of them, they're both accessible, but one of them might be a bit more tricky to get if you're not at a university. I can email you if you wish to email me to get the information. And that's it. Wow. I wasn't quite sure how long I was going to speak for, but I am really happy to take questions because I'm always conscious of time and the need to try and give good quality information about a topic, but that everybody also is busy. So I'm really open for questions, or I can go back to a particular slide if anybody wants to ask me anything.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's really interesting and really yeah, great to hear that it's been well received by caregivers and that you've got an opportunity to keep working. I had a question to start with, and then I'll see if anyone else has some. You noticed that one of the things that you support caregivers and parents to learn about is how to speak up and what they need for in the system or with health professionals. I wondered what your suggestions are for health professionals or for us, what we should take account of or be more aware of, or how we should, make our systems better, easier to navigate.
Yeah. Okay. A big question, really. I mean, obviously, parents' first point of contact is often their GP. So obviously having health professionals, frontline health professionals, understand FASD and know what parents are talking about. So still too often people are looking for just the basic sentinel facial features, which is only really apparent in about 10% of the population with FASD. So it is, it's a bit of a what's the word, rabbit hole to be doing that. So once people understand FASD is about brain domain impairment, they need to be obviously doing as much detailed fact finding. What do you mean, on every day, what's going on every day? Is this happening? What is happening? So good quality detailed assessments are fundamental. I mean, we find a lot of parents have preschool issues identified, but they're not getting full assessments. Sometimes people with can get SLT, speech language therapy, sometimes occupational therapy, physio, but sometimes they're just not getting enough basic good quality assessment that goes, maybe this is connected to prenatal alcohol exposure, or maybe it's just a neurodevelopmental disability that we need to do further assessment on and just hold the jury on whether it's prenatal alcohol exposure as a main cause. But essentially, parents will often say, I didn't get heard till it was too late, till we were nearly excluded from school. So that early stuff, of course, absolutely vital. A listening ear, I mean, obviously, health professionals keep an open mind as to what the nature of the disability is. And the reality for caregivers about the relentless exhaustion. Even myself, I'm incredibly competent, incredibly FASD informed, incredibly well qualified. I am often exhausted, utterly exhausted. And so you can be the best, most competent caregiver in the world, but you're still exhausted because of the nature of the high energy levels often of these children, all their profound needs and the interchanges with systems that you just leave them in a sorrowful state, and you have to pick up the pieces. So we need more diagnostic and assessment services, obviously, for FASD, but we also need, things that we can send them to so we can give and empower caregivers. Somebody just asked, I can see that question there, what's the cost for the parent to participate? So far, it has been free. We haven't charged because I've delivered it myself out of using my job, so therefore I haven't had to in a sense fund my sort of grunty hours, but NOFASD did get some money, so they were able to pay some of those costs over and above what you would normally do. So people have funded through the I think the NDIS in Australia might have, the disability scheme. Here in Aotearoa, there's been a bit of money given to FASD-CAN through, I think, the Ministry of Health primarily. There might have been some Ministry of Social Development money, but it's not been a huge amount. So, but at the moment, parents have not been asked to pay. We've avoided that as much as possible by keeping the ongoing costs as low as possible. The digital environment helps that a wee bit, doesn't it? In terms of you don't have to turn up to a place and sort those kind of resources. So that's been positive too.
And do you have a time limit? You mentioned there's an email address if people themselves or are aware of people that might be interested in participating. Is that currently just for the near future, or
I would suggest the near future. I mean, I know FASD-CAN plan to run more courses now that they've had successful pilots, so they'll be running them next year. So obviously, the rest of this year, if people are sending emails to say, hey, is there anything happening in my area, that'll get responded to.
Yeah, great. Does anyone else have any questions? You're welcome to put your microphone on or to pop a question in the chat or any comments. I wonder, Anita, you mentioned the I guess fatigue and exhaustion with a variety of for caregivers. Do you have anything that you think is useful to convey to us as a group of people that potentially might be working with caregivers? I guess the listening ear you mentioned. Is there anything else about that lived experience that you think is important to cue into?
Well, I think often people don't feel believed when they talk about the relentlessness of it's kind of being the external brain. It's a bit language that's not appropriate, but basically that kind of co-regulating thinker alongside the children and young people, that is exhausting because you have to think for yourself, but then you absolutely have to think for another's lives, and it's for much longer than you would. I mean, you do that for your toddlers, let's face it, we all do as parents. You have to do that for your teenagers and your young adults. So the life course element, and the only way you can cope with that is if you have enough self-care and enough breaks, and you have people who believe you and go like, oh yeah, Matt, I totally get what you're saying here. I wonder how we can find a way of making it a little bit less relentless and less exhausting. Too many parents, caregivers would say they don't feel acknowledged enough by, it's not just health professionals, it's sort of welfare, justice, all manner education professionals, because what often happens is sometimes families get supports and sometimes a reasonable amount of supports if the needs are really high in the children, but it's very easy, well, it appears very easy, it can be quite tough for a support worker to come for an hour or 3 hours, but they always get to go home. Caregivers are at home. They often find their place is not a place of safety, so they have to live in that for year after year after year. And so certainly people need to understand the intensity levels, and of course we're still battling to get core funding for FASD. It's still not accepted as a funded disability service in its own right. It is accepted alongside intellectual disability or co-occurring autism, also co-occurring mental health, which is often high for this group. Yes, there'll be a limited amount of funding, and it failed to get accident ACC cover a few years ago, and yet you go, did these children choose to be disabled? I don't think so, but there you go. I mean, I'm part of obviously a group of people who are strong advocates to see that changed. What is required, the question for diagnosis of FASD in New Zealand? Well, there's actually a review of the diagnostic guidelines going on at the moment. There is some funded research that Sarah Goldsberry and Andy Crawford are heading up in different parts of New Zealand, essentially revamping the diagnosis guidelines for Aotearoa. Essentially, a multidisciplinary diagnosis is really important, and that can be a range of diagnosis from different people, psychologists, neuropsychologists, SLTs, a pediatrician, a psychiatrist. I mean, ideally working as a team. Hawke's Bay Developmental Coordination Service, DAPS, I think it's called. They're a really good example of how it's done well, so you can look them up online. But essentially, it's intensive. It could be a couple of days. There are some private providers. There's some health boards that do it, district health boards. Not enough. There are some mixed sort of private-public providers. Not many. And so to get a diagnosis is immensely difficult. Sometimes people who've got children in care can get a diagnosis through the post-permanent care support services, the Home for Life options. So it's really hard to get a paid funded, because it can cost up to $9,000 if you were to privately pay for it. I mean, you don't usually have to, but I mean, I know you sometimes have to pay for autism diagnosis too, which can be expensive, but it's pretty out there. And you can wait for years. Yes, as someone said, Kim, hi Kim, for diagnosis in the public system, absolutely. So we do need to see changes where it's a little bit more automatic, because pediatricians kind of, who are in the know, increasingly kind of can, sort of say, yeah, I think it probably is FASD, but I don't know where to send you for a diagnosis because my own health board won't do it. So that can be sad for pediatricians to be able to keep saying that to their patients, to be honest.
And yeah, a real challenge for families to navigate all those different systems as well. Yeah. Lovely. Okay, thank you. That's really interesting, Anita. We really appreciate your time, and we're grateful for opening our eyes to this work and really important course that you've developed, and I can imagine that that's that's been really useful for lots of people. We hope that keeps going. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you to our audience as well. Anita's mentioned she's happy for you to be contacted, to maybe if people are interested in reading the academic paper that's behind the paywall of a journal somewhere. But otherwise, have a look at the one that was available publicly, and we hope to see many of you back here in a month's time to discuss knowledge translation and how we can take our learning from this session into our own daily work. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.
Thank you.
Thank you.